you very much, Dustin. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, depending on where you're logging in from. So thank you for joining us in this virtual session for Ashoka U. And today's session is about teaching social innovation. Context matters and opportunity knocks. And I want to be able to take a moment to give you some insight about what our learning outcomes are going to be today. So you might have read this, of course, in the program, and what attracted you to our session is two things we want to be able to accomplish in this hour. One, we want to be able to assess how your institution's profile influences your curriculum. So give you some grist for the mill to be able to do that. And then also to provide you an opportunity to align your curriculum with current trends, goals, and stakeholder needs. And let me go ahead and introduce our presenters today. So we have presenters representing 3 different universities and engaging with 3 different universities in 3 different parts of the United States and Canada, I'm sorry, North America, so including Canada. So we have Rebecca Aden and Jabari Brown, both affiliated with Tulane University. Rebecca Aden is Associate Director of Social Innovation Strategy of the Taylor Center for Social Innovation and Design Thinking at Tulane University. And Jabari Brown is the Outreach Coordinator and Site Manager for Grow That Youth Farm. And they are going to talk about some of the work they've been doing together. Anita Nowak is the Academic Associate for the Integrated Management Students Fellows Program at McGill University in Montreal. And she's going to present some work about the Integrated Management Fellows Program. Marissa Getz and Cassie Bingham, they are both affiliated with Utah Valley University. Marissa Getz is the Learning Coordinator for the Center for Social Impact, and Cassie Bingham is the Coordinator of Engagement for that same Center for Social Impact. And they're going to talk about the work that they do on their campus and within their community. And I, Lakita Blockson, I serve as your facilitator of this session. I'm the founding faculty director of social innovation, our Master's of Arts program, and I'm also an associate professor of business management at Agnes Scott College in Decatur, Georgia. So our agenda for today, and we should be able to get everything done within the next 55 minutes. We want to start off with that land acknowledgement and with a mindfulness exercise, and this will be an opportunity for you to be able to fully engage in the room. And we want to be able to also, throughout the presentation, as you're listening to and engaging in the presentations and sharing questions, we wanted to acknowledge, of course, the experiences and backgrounds and knowledge bases that each of you bring to the room as well. So please feel free, again, as was mentioned earlier, please go ahead and put questions into the chat box, and we will have an opportunity during the Q&A session toward the end of our hour to be able to answer as many questions as possible. And I'm going to provide, after the mindfulness exercise, a brief overview of the session and why we're here today. And then each of the 3 presenters are going to take about 8 minutes to be able to share what they're doing on their respective campuses. And then again, toward the end, we'll have a great, hopefully a wonderfully interactive Q&A session. And then we'll be able to wrap up. We want to definitely wrap up with a hard goodbye. But we are going to, as presenters and facilitator, we'll be available for a few moments after 4:45 if there are any remaining questions that any particular individuals might have. All right. So with that in mind, we want to, in addition to recognizing our land acknowledgements for Minneapolis, Minnesota, which we've done for the conference itself, we want to also provide land acknowledgements for the respective institutions that we represent. So Tulane University would like to acknowledge the indigenous history of New Orleans and more broadly, Louisiana, and recognize the Titimacha tribe of Louisiana, the Coushatta tribe of Louisiana, the Jena Band of Choctaw Indians, and the Tunica Biloxi Indian tribe of Louisiana. McGill University is situated on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations. And so McGill University, being based in Montreal, Canada, recognizes and respects the Kanien'kehá:ka as the traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which the university meets today. The state of Utah, where Utah Valley University is located, is home to a number of nations, including the Ute, Lushootseed, Shoshone-Bannock, Shoshone, Haute, Hopi, Navajo, and Zuni nations. And then lastly, my college, Agnes Scott College, is based in Decatur, Georgia. And it's the ancestral homeland of the Muskogee, or also spelled and pronounced Muskogee, Creek and Iowa Cherokee nations. So thank you for appreciating our giving reference to the land in which we operate. At this moment, we will now switch to a mindfulness exercise, and that's led by Jabari Brown of Grow That Youth Farm. So he's going to take a few moments to engage in this exercise. So if you're interested or if you're willing, please open up your cameras so that we can see all of you and as you engaged in this 2-minute exercise. Jabari?
Thank you. I really appreciate that land acknowledgement. So, welcome everybody. I would like to guide us through an experience that brings us present to where we are. So I'm going to ask you to allow yourself to relax in your seat, on your couch, on your floor, wherever it is you find yourself. I want you to be aware of those things that you're holding in your mind, those to-do lists, things around the house you have to do afterwards. I'm going to ask you to find a place to put them away from your computer right now. And as you find yourself sitting, I'm going to ask that you notice the rhythm of your body, your heartbeat. Are you nervous right now? Are you anxious? Are you really excited? Notice what's going on inside of yourself. And with your feet on the ground, connecting to the space or dwelling you're in, the land it sits on, and ultimately to the world that we share together. In this moment, trusting all of eternity to hold you in its grasp. Thank you and welcome to, thanks for participating in the mindfulness exercise.
Thank you very much, Jabari, for leading us through that exercise. So hope we are all in one accord as we progress through this presentation. Okay. So let me just provide you just a broad, brief context of why we came together to think about curriculum and the different stakeholder approaches in balancing our curricular needs in developing social entrepreneurship or social innovation courses and programs. As you can imagine, there are a variety of theoretical lenses that we use in social innovation or when we study social entrepreneurship. And those theoretical lenses include entrepreneurship, technology and innovation, economic sociology, institutional theory, and justice theory. And you can imagine they're all coming from different areas of the campus or various areas of academia, whether we're talking about the hard and natural sciences, we're talking about the social sciences, we're talking about the humanities and fine arts. We're talking about the professions, and I mean by professions broadly, you know, whether it's in business, engineering, education, public health, those applied fields that have a history in the liberal arts and sciences, but nonetheless are now established in their own right, in their own fields. And they bring a variety of different theoretical lenses to the table in terms of social innovation. So we want to be able to acknowledge that those different lenses may be used or are being used in a variety of shapes or forms and in combinations in the curricula that we'll talk about today, as well as in the curricula or curriculum that you either have developed in your own program or you seek to develop in your program. Another thing that we want to be able to provide in terms of context is that we want to think about the sociological factors that influence why we created our various programs and the examples that we'll share today. What influenced our ability to be able to meet the needs of our stakeholders. And we think about it in terms of demographics, both in terms of our campus profile, as well as our community profile. You know, where are the communities in which we are serving, how broad or how narrow, local or how global our communities are, and what is that profile? Who do we serve? So we have an inward focus, an inward lens, as well as an external outward lens. And then also in terms of sociological factors, we want to keep in mind a lot of social cultural factors that play a role in what we do and how we do it, in terms particularly of the types of social problems or issues that may drive students who want to pursue this degree or pursue taking a class in social innovation, or the problems in which we, through our coursework, want to be able to help resolve within our respective communities. And then we want to think about all, you know, influence of current trends. What are those trends that, whether those are trends that are positive or allow for great opportunities to spring forth, or maybe threats or challenges that may mitigate or hinder our ability to do certain things. So we want to keep those things in mind as we are developing curricula. And then we also have to think in mind or keep in mind our campus organization. We need to be able to think about to what degree are our programs able to be standalone courses, or are they part of an integrated program? To what degree are our campuses allowing our social innovation programs to be interdisciplinary? That means they serve across campuses and allow for input from various colleges and schools. Or are they siloed within one particular school or college on the campus? And then you may have some situations where social innovation programs and curricula are delivered through a school-based program or a school-based initiative. Or it may be outside of an academic school, but maybe a center or an institute or a campus-wide initiative. So we'll speak to the examples we have today. We'll speak to some of those differences and distinctions and some of the positive and some not so positive aspects of being able to accomplish curriculum development under those conditions. With that in mind, I want to go ahead now and switch over to the first of three short presentations. So at this point, we're going to hear from Rebecca Otten and Jabari Brown, both working with and through Tulane University. So Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Blackson. My name's Rebecca. I work at Tulane University in New Orleans, and I'm going to be co-presenting with my colleague Jabari Brown. While I met him while he was working at Grodat Youth Farm, he is now an equity, diversity, inclusion consultant, and will share more about his work and how it integrates into our curriculum. So we can go to the next slide. In 2012, we at Tulane started an undergraduate minor. I think one thing that's important to note is that our students have core areas of expertise that they're studying in their majors across campus, and then they add the lens of social innovation. So you can see on this slide some of the areas that we are trying to focus on in our coursework. And I think kind of some overarching things we're thinking about is building critical thinking and creative thinking skills, perspective taking, understanding systems, and really building habits and skills and muscles around multiculturalism. So if we go to the next slide, this really kind of focuses in on our introductory course, and that course is unique. We have about 150 students that take the course every year. About 35% of those students end up pursuing the PsyC minor, but the remaining 65% often started taking the class as a part of completing their core distribution requirements. And I think that really impacts how we think about what we want to focus on within the intro course. So when I look at other social innovation syllabi, we only spend about 20% of our time in that class on what I might think of as typical social innovation topics. One of the advantages is that we have multiple courses, so we don't have to cover everything in one class, but we're also really thinking about who are the students that are coming into the class and what do we want them to walk away with. We spend a lot of time helping our students think about what are social and environmental problems, how can we think critically about what might be causing those problems, and how do we understand the systems and the larger context in which we're operating. We also think about social change strategies more broadly, and we often have students kind of come in assuming that social innovation is always going to be the best strategy for creating change, and we want to dispel that myth. And we do spend a lot of time explicitly thinking about multiculturalism and how do we understand, appreciate, and work across difference, all within these larger processes. And so Jabari is going to talk more about that, the multiculturalism curriculum that we found to be a really great fit for our program.
Thank you.
These lovely pictures Becky put together, thank you. So Visions is a nonprofit that
we lead trainers around diversity, equity, and inclusion for and provide coaching for individual organizations. And the core piece of work really is creating a space for individuals to see, understand, appreciate, and utilize the differences that are in the room. I often say in trainings that I don't have to work to get individuals to understand that we have to have water, that we have to have food. However, when there are differences along the line of gender or sexual orientation, because of the early learnings that I and others have had, oftentimes there needs to be bridges built towards one another in understanding the differences that are there. And again, once the differences are understood, we can utilize those differences for the greater good of the whole. So as Becky said, I live here in New Orleans, and we provide, our core training model is called PACE, which is Personal Approach to Change and Equity. You can follow this information on our website at visions-inc.org. But it's a 4-day in-depth understanding of our model. And so our model is what's called a process approach. And what that means is our space, we're not really sharing numbers to prove that oppression exists. We believe that it really is in the experiences of individuals' lived lives that they bring to the circle, that they bring to school, that they bring work. And based on those experiences, there is an understanding that oppression exists. So because I've had some time to clean up around my space, I thought GoDad hired Visions in 2013 to come and lead a training for the organization. And so GoDad's an urban farm. What we do is hire teenagers from around the city to grow food. And I was the only person of color that was on staff, and none of us was from New Orleans. And so being that all the difference was there, and specifically with the history of growing food in the South, it was important to talk about the difference in the room, aside from just allowing them to exist, right? Because the conversation is going to happen. Want to be a part of the conversation, as opposed to allowing it to just flow or move forward. And so that has been the very crux and a part of the genesis of Grow That. And I think has created a space where teenagers feel very free to call the space their own because of the Visions model. So in the beginning, we started, so the teenagers are on a farm 2 days out of the week, and they'll steer the organization where students, alumni can apply to be what's called crew, assistant crew lead. And we wanted to create space, wanted to create space for the high school teenager have practice leading others as they would do in the spring. And so that led to the partnership with the Ties class at Tulane. And what we found is that it wasn't serving our purpose because there was a misalignment in priorities of Grow That and the youth and of this specific program that we were working with. And so one of the things I really want to say is that the model isn't perfect. Like even today, our model isn't perfect. And equity isn't perfect. It continues to evolve as people do. So as you are creating your programs, don't be afraid to use the eraser and go back to the drawing board. So I hand it to Beckett to talk about the next piece of this.
Thanks, Jabari. Actually, Dr. Blackson, if you could go back just for a minute. So as we were developing this partnership with Grodat Youth Farm, we realized, I came across Tania Mitchell's work on critical service learning, and we realized that that was really the model we were creating. And I'd be happy to talk in more depth about what that looks like. But two things that I think are really important around redistributing power is that we actually pay our community partners for the valuable teaching that they are providing to our students. And my partners are working with high school aged young people, and those young people are in leadership positions leading college age students. And that is really meaningful in terms of the relationships that they're able to develop and their confidence in building leadership skills. So just to kind of wrap up, I think I'm really going to focus in on context matters, and I'd be happy to talk more about opportunity in the future. But Tulane is a predominantly white institution in a majority Black city. We have a two-tiered public service requirement, and less than 20% of all of our undergraduate students come from the greater New Orleans region. That means this class is often the first time they're having a meaningful interaction with a New Orleans citizen outside of their relationship to Tulane University. And so that really informs why we focus on the multiculturalism framework, why the critical service learning model is so important, and why we focus on understanding systems as they're playing out in New Orleans and how racial disparities are threaded throughout those. So I'll share more information and can talk more about that later. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Rebecca and Jabari. Again, for our attendees, please feel free if you have any questions for Rebecca and or Jabari regarding their program based in New Orleans. Please put your question into the chat room, and we will be able to answer those questions at the end of the session or toward the end of the session. All right, with that in mind, I'm going to shift over to Anita.
Just unmuted myself. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Thumbs up if you can. I want to start off by just saying thank you to everybody on the Ashoka team. I think they've done such a marvelous job in this transition to online. Just kudos. And it's been a delight, Lakita and Rebecca and Marissa, just collaborating with you over the last few weeks. So I just want to start there. So yeah, my name is Anita Novak, and I teach at McGill University, which is in Montreal, Canada. And I am an academic associate responsible for a fellowship program. It's called the Integrated Management Stella. Could you just, yeah, thank you. Which is a unique leadership development opportunity or experience designed to help students explore their purpose and develop professional competencies while working on some of society's most pressing problems. Thank you. And just to give you context of about where we are situated, we're in the Faculty of Management. We're not a typical B school. We believe in management across the sectors, not just the private sector. And our faculty is named after Marcel Deshotel. He's an alum, and one of his first gifts was to establish an institute. He is a big fan of integrative thinking, which comes out of Roger Martin's work at Rotman. If you're not familiar with it, I really encourage you to check it out. But essentially, integrated management constructively faces the tensions of different perspectives on value to implement strategies that transcend rather than accept trade-offs. So that's like a big, loaded description of what integrated management is, but I think we all know that, you know, with everything going on, it's never perfect. So there's always trade-offs, and the idea is to transcend them as opposed to accepting trade-offs. And so our mandate at the Institute is to develop an integrated management approach. So if you have if you want more information, you can go check out our website or watch the video about our fellowship program, or you certainly can email me. Now, when it comes to opportunities knocking, I think we are all aware of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so the fellowship sees these UN SDGs as the major frame for the fellowship. Another opportunity that McGill sees, if you don't mind switching to the next slide, is the University Global Coalition. So if anybody who's watching right now is unfamiliar with the UGC, I invite you to check out their website. It's a global platform of colleges and universities that are committed to working together in partnership with the UN to support the SDGs both locally and globally through education, research, and service missions. And really, it's a call to action for greater collaboration and collective action. And it's a mechanism to amplify the voice of education, higher education, vis-a-vis the SDGs. And McGill is one of the Canadian members. So our fellowship has two synergistic components. The first is a faculty project whereby students apprentice with one, sometimes more than one Desautel faculty members to conduct research or build partnerships or develop new courses. So it's a chance for the fellows to meaningfully collaborate with faculty members. And a lot of it is around research. The second component to the fellowship is a course that we call Managing for Impact, where students, and this is a 6-credit course, so it lasts all year long, where they work on an impact initiative with a small group of students to advance one of the UN SDGs within our community. And threaded across the year, they also have access to individual and group coaching. So some of the examples of faculty projects include the responsible use of AI, ESG and corporate sustainability reporting, bike sharing systems in smart cities, and Canada's food guide impact on businesses. So whatever fabulous research our faculty members are working on, they have an opportunity to join forces and collaborate with those faculty members on that research in tandem taking the course. So some of the work that fellows will do will be very focused on like the design of interviews, or sometimes they conduct interviews, sometimes they map stakeholder ecosystems, sometimes they participate in the writing of publications. So it gives them some really exciting experience. And a lot of students who are thinking about grad school see that as like a really added value of the fellowship, that they get to work so closely with faculty members. Examples of impact initiatives, if you don't mind going back, Deb. Thank you. Include maybe some obvious ones like social enterprises might come out of an impact initiative, some tech solutions. Sometimes students might be interested in providing training programs or knowledge mobilization. Some students want to attack public policy or work on civic engagement or mass mobilization. We are agnostic to the kind of orientation they have towards impact. So it's really based on, what the individual and groups, decide that they want to focus on. And we just piloted our first year. I'm actually in the process of grading final reflection papers. There were a small group of students. We had a dozen students that participated in the pilot, and in the fall, we're going to scale to 50 students, and ideally within 2 years to 100 students. And just a couple of examples. One group decided to work on a resource. It was a database for the circular economy and how small and medium organizations could learn about their own processes by reviewing the resources in that database. So that was an interesting project. Another group looked at increasing accessibility for people with reduced mobility. They partnered with an organization called Move, M-U-V-E, which actually has an app that you can download onto your phone, which is essentially an Uber for people with disabilities. So they did geotagging on our campus, and they looked at sort of the whole idea of accessibility for people with reduced mobility. And then the third group in our pilot benchmarked best practices for mental health on university campuses. And ultimately their impact meant creating a new position within the Faculty of Management's undergraduate society focused on wellness, student wellness. So those are some examples that came out of our pilot. So just the last slide is, here's a select set of takeaways. We're working on a retrospective where we're kind of synthesizing all the learning, but just a few takeaways that I think may be helpful or important to underline here is that this course has some really important philosophical underpinnings, and the learning objectives are key. So sort of managing expectations of the students who onboard as fellows to understand that this course is not like other courses. We use Otto Scharmer's work on vertical literacy and Pappy Thornton's work on heropreneurship as some of the philosophical underpinnings, where the idea is that you know, education in silos and education with grades and regurgitating back on exams, like we kind of really blast that open, and it's really meant to be experiential and self-directed. And the idea of apprenticing with a problem and having humility around social impact work is necessary. So that's embedded and thread throughout the programming. Another takeaway is that, you know, anytime a student has an opportunity to, you know, self-direct their own learning and experience learning outside the classroom, the student motivation skyrockets. So we've noticed that. I'm sure that's not a surprise to any educator listening. When we were teaching this class, made reflection as a leadership practice very important. So at the end of every class, they had time to reflect. They were invited at the end of the semester to share their reflections. So we made that a really important part of the learning, and that it's like an impact on self to actually reflect throughout. And the fact that it was a whole year provided like a whole other layer of learning. And finally, you know, a course that is intended to create social impact, you know, you can't grade that because sometimes you're grading apples and oranges. So I think it's kind of really important to also emphasize that learning is also a big impact to value. So those would be my thoughts. And I think I've gone 1 minute over, apologies.
No worries. Thank you very much, Anita. Thank you very much. And again, she's affiliated with McGill University. All right, and last but not least, we have our guests from Utah Valley University. So Marissa and Cassie, feel free to unmute your mics.
Thanks for inviting the unmuting ourselves. Thanks so much for all of your help in organizing all of this, Dr. Boxon. She's been absolutely vital to everything that we've done. So thanks so much. So if you could go to the next slide, actually. So what we have is a course that is an intro to social impact course. And we'll talk about it a little bit, but so currently it's housed in the business school, although we ourselves, the Center for Social Impact, are actually located in student affairs, but with a very, very strong connection, dual reporting to academic and student affairs, which is a really interesting place to be. It can the relationship gets kind of rocky sometimes, but that's okay. And so we're working on having our own prefix and being able to host courses out of our center and not out of a different school. And so this course is now required for a social impact scholar distinction, where students have to go through some service learning classes, or they have to work on they have to design and run an impact project themselves. And for any of our student leadership positions, we have an impact fellows program, et cetera. Because the class is so new right now, it's strongly suggested, but in the future, we plan on making it practically mandatory unless students understand the concepts themselves. Right now it's a 1-credit class. We're hoping that it can expand into 3 credits sometime soon. And it would be so easy. I mean, if we had to change it to 3 credits or even 2 credits tomorrow, we could do it. So that's kind of the intro to what our class is. And the purpose of it is how can we get students to really be thinking about these basic frameworks about social problems, about how to make a difference in the world. Oh, perfect. I was trying to go next myself. So in terms of context matters, some of the huge contextual factors that impacted our course design were, first, we're an open enrollment institution. We are the largest institution in Utah, so about 40,000 total students. That means we have so many identities, experiences, skill sets. And also, with being an open enrollment institution, you know, we have some students who go on to Oxford, and then we have other students who this is the only way that they're going to get through school is by going maybe 1 course a semester while they're working full time. So many of our students work full time. A lot kind of feel like they're in survival mode. They can't give a lot to extra opportunities. We've recently moved our center. It's recently been rebranded as Center for Social Impact from Volunteer and Service Learning, which is a huge shift. Huge, and there's a huge lag in students understanding our purpose and what that name change means. And then next comes, there's a really deeply religious lens on social change and service. And that's not a bad thing. So many students in our valley belong to the LDS church. And it's this very like service oriented opportunity and like way of framing doing good in the world. Not a lot of systems thinking, not a lot of like sustainability thinking, et cetera. And so everyone wants to do good, but the framing is it's through this one particular method.
Yeah, so because of that context, just to make sure, can everybody hear me okay? Awesome. Because of that context, we wanted to make sure that with this and because we're working with so many non-traditional students and students across the spectrum, because we're working in this area of transition from really only focusing on direct service to now focusing on social impact holistically, and also working within this really unique kind of service-oriented religious context that doesn't really incorporate a lot of intersectionality, we knew that we needed to come up with some really clear learning outcomes for the class and then work on learning methods that would lead to these outcomes. So just to go over those learning outcomes, the first one, of course, is just to explain the definition of social impact. A lot of our students, this is their very first time dipping their toes into social impact beyond direct service as one pathway. So we want to explain the definition of holistic social impact and then the corresponding 6 pathways or methodologies that we use, which we'll talk a little bit more in just a few minutes about those. And then 2, we want to identify power dynamics in social problems and interventions. We want to talk about power constructs. We want to talk about intersecting identities and historical context and how that very deeply affects how we do effective social impact. 3 is to critically analyze social impact practices after learning about those things, being able to analyze and evaluate impact and if there really has been an impact or a positive impact. And then number 4, we want our students to be able to explain how basic design thinking processes can connect to equitable social impact. And so we're gonna just go over very briefly the 3 modules that we do in our classroom, and I'll go over the first one. So the first module, we have to start, like I said, at the very basics. This is really important for our students, and this includes a lot of language setting and a lot of defining. And this is something that we kind of learned, the first iteration of this class went fairly well, but one of the biggest weakness gaps that we identified was that we were assuming that our students knew a lot of terminology and a lot of jargon from the social impact field that they just didn't know. We were assuming that they knew certain concepts, even as basic to some of us as privilege and intersectionality. And those assumptions really, held us back a little bit from making some of those greater learning outcomes happen with some of our students. So in our second iteration, we ended up developing some tools to help us along those. So I'll go over this slide really quick and then show a few of those tools that we use to help our students really grasp these concepts as beginners. Of course, we go into what social impact is, and we have a cycle that I'll show that kind of helps students realize that social impact is an ongoing process and a long-term process if we want it to be sustainable and effective. We literally hand our students a glossary to explain to them what privilege is, what intersectionality is, and other terminology related to these things such as diversity, inclusion, equality, equity, things like that. We literally hand them a glossary and take an entire classroom to go over some of those key terms that have to be understood. We also explain what systems thinking is, and then I'll show you some of the tools that we help to break down how you can start to map a system around a problem. We really emphasize defining and understanding social problems. We want our students married to problems and not married to solutions, because we know that leads to effective social impact. And that also includes creating a theory of change for implementation, and then also evaluating impact. So if you go to the next slide, I'll start showing you some of those tools and visuals that we use. So this is the first cycle that we show. This is before we go deeply in to design thinking later on in the course. This just shows that we define and understand a social problem, implement using a theory of change, go through that implementation intervention, and then we evaluate our impact, and then we reflect on that. These are the first 3 real systems mapping assignments that we take our students through. Like we said, they're really foundational and basic. We have them define a problem by the problem, scoping it by demographic and geographic location. We then have them create a problem tree, which has them identify root causes and contributing factors and the consequences of the problem and how those interloop and interrelate. And then we have them do a basic stakeholder systems map, which has them mapping out players within the problem. You can see that we've segmented that off by some of the basic sectors of society. And then our theory of change, which most of you are familiar with this, we've just changed a little bit of the terminology to make it more accessible. Instead of inputs, activities, outputs, we define those, what we invest, what we do, what happened, etc.
All right, now on to the next module. So for kind of like the mid-period of our class, we talk about each one of these 6 pathways. So this framework originally comes from Stanford, from the Haas Center for Public Service, and they call them the 6 pathways to public service. We call them the 6 pathways to social impact, because that works for us. And so we talk about each one of these as methodologies, and just like Anita was saying, in a very solutions agnostic way, okay, well, you have to understand a system and the points of leverage. And so that's why we kind of talk about the first. You have to define the problem. You have to be apprenticing with that problem before you can choose a solution or a method, or even a combination of them. And a lot of people end up getting stuck on, oh, well, social entrepreneurship or just market-based solutions. That's the only way to do it. And a lot of...
Unfortunately, I think Marissa's connection may have dropped out.
I can continue
Awesome.
until it pops back on. So like she was explaining, we use this framework and we use these methodologies exactly like Anita was explaining, in kind of a solutions agnostic way. We let our students through this class start to identify through those tools that I was showing before, how do we evaluate which methodology will be best for a problem, or which series of methodologies or combination of methodologies will be best for a problem. So we actually do 1 class each on each of these pathways, and we give a theory for the pathway, we give a case study for the pathway, and we help students to kind of see how these different methodologies can be applied. Okay, and so then our third module, which is kind of our wrap-up module, taking all of these different tools and these different foundational visuals and concepts and definitions that we've given throughout the class, we tried to end on an equity design for social impact framework, which kind of wraps all these tools into one cohesive and intuitive strategy for implementing social impact. So design thinking, many of you may be familiar with this already, but it's a problem-solving framework that is not linear, it's cyclical, and it really emphasizes taking what might be considered the user perspective, or maybe in a social impact field, the demographic of focus, their perspective, and then putting that front and center when it comes to defining a problem and finding effective solutions or interventions for a problem. We take that a step further. We teach the design thinking steps, but then we use equity design, which is really kind of the cutting edge of design thinking. At this point, there's several groups including the Stanford Design School, the Creative Reaction Lab, who is actually presenting in another place in Ashoka. They teach equity design, which takes the same steps of design thinking, but adds the lenses of acknowledging power constructs, acknowledging historical context, which both of the other groups before us have also presented about to some extent, and making sure that those are key lenses that we're doing the design process through, and also incorporating diverse co-creators within that process, not just in the research stage, not just in the interview stage, but within all of the stages of the design thinking process. And so that's how we kind of bring all of these pieces together. And then on our final class and our final wrap up, we make sure to ask some of the ethical questions and the equity questions that come along with all of that. Marissa, are you back on? If you are, we're on the class principles slide.
My computer died, but did not tell me. It was when we started, so I'm so sorry. That's very embarrassing. I know that we're running over time, so we're happy to talk about these class principles in the discussion. We've sort of talked about them already, but these are class principles that we give to students at the beginning. So if they're sort of pushing back against some of that, if where there's an organization that they really love and we're like, well, let's look at it, we're able to really talk through it using these principles.
And same with the teaching principles. I'll take 10 seconds really quick just to reemphasize those. Language setting is our bread and butter. We cannot assume our person already know these concepts or these terminologies. Power, privilege, and systems are explicit in every topic of social impact, and we showcase a variety of methodological perspectives and then let students choose. So thank you so much.
Thank you again, Marissa and Cassie. All right, thank you, everyone. We are now at the point where we can answer aloud, and we have quite a few questions in the chat box. So we'll start going through, and I think some of the questions were being compiled by our facilitator, Dustin. So Dustin, if you would like to go ahead and start helping to read some of the questions that is coming through the chat box. And if you have some other questions, if you all posted questions or did not post questions, but have some questions about course planning, workshop design in the process, or worksheet design rather, sustainable development goals and multicultural vision models and the like, and the content that was discussed today, or anything else, feel free to go ahead and add those to the chat box. But I'll turn it back over to you, Dustin, to help start the ball rolling with the questions. And then depending on the question is, then we'll have different presenters respond.
And
Awesome.
Dustin,
Yeah,
actually, I just wanted to shout out, I see Debbie Brock's in the room and just acknowledging the expertise in the room. So Debbie has a wonderful resource where a bunch of syllabi are shared. I see a lot of people looking for syllabi and a newsletter on social change innovators. So maybe she can share some of those details either on video or in the chat.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
I will unmute real fast. Yeah, if you just go to socialchangeinnovators.com, and I will put it in the chat as well. But what we've done is we've curated a lot of these resources. So the Design Thinking from Stanford, there's a whole module on that. Changemaking 101 was curated by Ashoka Yu. We've got a new modules on systems thinking, and the session with Danielle Pappy-Thornton tomorrow is going to be outstanding. And I've learned so much from them. That module's on there. So you can look at the link for teaching resources. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Dustin.
Awesome. The first question is for Anita. There was a question regarding the compensation for the fellows. Are they paid or otherwise compensated?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So 2-3 years ago, the fellowship program was just fellows working in collaboration with faculty, and they were getting paid. So they were getting paid about $1,200 per semester. Now that's Canadian, so it's maybe about $900 US per semester. And that was great for international students who otherwise could not find paid work in Canada necessarily. So the popularity was exponential. And then it became like a huge line on our budget. So the idea of making a 4-credit option was sort of a workaround to the paid model. So this pilot that we just had for a year, the students who participated in the pilot did not get paid, but they did get credits. And now in the fall of 2020, we are going to a non-paid model. So all students will get 6 credits for doing the fellowship.
Awesome. And to go off of that question, we have a question about whether or not the program started as credit-bearing programs or started as non-credit, and how that transitioned to credit, or like you said now, changing the model from compensation to credit. So I think that's an open question to all the programs that presented, whether or not they started out as credit-bearing, and if not, how did they advocate for credit?
I can briefly share from Tulane. We started our co-curricular programming outside of academic credit in 2009, and then we started offering credit-bearing experience in 2012. And today we found that with undergraduate students, we have a nice mix of credit-bearing and non-credit-bearing, but with graduate students, they actually prefer the non-credit-bearing experiences at this point. And then we're working with graduate level faculty to infuse these concepts in their core schools.
So for us at UVU, I've actually only been working there for a couple years, but when I got in, I was in charge of our distinction, so our social impact scholar distinction, and all of the requirements were sort of dispersed into other areas, and there was no one single like curricular piece that we had full control over. And I was like, oh, well, we need to do that. And so it started as a series of workshops that were required for students to attend. We would have kind of small, about 10 people cohorts, and would arrange the way that these workshops were built around their schedules. So they usually happened in the evening. We would have food for them when they got there, and then go through. And so then this class, after we had so many people, were like, no, we just want this to be a class that would be way easier. Students will be able to put more effort into it. There's more of a measure of accountability. And so then it got switched into this one credit class, and hopefully we'll build and become either keeping that and then having a more in-depth 3 credit class, or whatever it might be. But that's how it started at UVU.
Awesome. Any other thoughts on that question before we move on to the next? Cool. I got a private message regarding the program around privilege and intersectionality. And the question is, how do you cover that in a short amount of time? And are there any challenges in covering that content area?
I'm not sure if this was targeted towards a different program or what I was saying about it, but I'll shoot in and then somebody else can answer as well. There's definitely a challenge in covering that material in a 1 credit class, and that's why we're pushing so hard to have a more in-depth 3 credit class at the very least. We also try to incorporate the principles of equity and inclusion and privilege and intersectionality into all of the services that we provide from our Center for Social Impact. So a lot of the students that we teach kind of have crossover into some of our other programs or leadership opportunities. So we do try to push right now in any way we can these as the foundational blocks before somebody can really engage in effective social impact work in any way that we can, in trainings, in leadership workshops, in the programs that we have. But in our class, we have found that the best way to hotwire as much as we can is to do that language setting from the get-go. And when we send off, I've seen a lot of emails, we're going to be sending our syllabus and also some of those tools. We can send the glossary and the slides that we use because we have found a way to use some really basic definitions for those words and like really cool analogies and metaphors that seem to help, especially in a place where we're teaching students who are really not from a super diverse setting here in Utah County. And so we've had to like really water it down to the very fundamentals, to the easiest way to understand. We're always working on improving that, but we feel like we've got some pretty cool tools that we'll be sharing with anybody who would like them.
Just to add one more thing is, I think that, so we have that original like language setting conversation, we talk about it, there's a lot of reflection. They have an assignment where they have to reflect outside of class and after class. And also that's a running theme in all of the rest of our conversation. So as we're talking about those different methodologies like policy and governance, you know, we have these questions like, well, who has the power here? Why do they have the power here? When we're talking about systems, we talk about redlining and talk about, oh, well, what does this mean for, you know, how do we, you know, how do these ideas of privilege and intersectionality connect with systems? So it's like this, we really language set very strongly and have some pretty hardcore reflection at the beginning, but then it's built into every other class and connected to every other piece that like talking about philanthropy, et cetera, all those things. So yeah, it's a really, when we say it's an important theme of our class, we really do mean that every single class it comes up.
And I'll just add to that, we have the same experience at Tulane, and Jabari, if there's anything you want to share about the visions model. But I think in addition to all of the things that Cassie and Marissa just talked about, it's really important for our faculty to be grappling with what this means for them in their personal lives and how that shows up in their classroom. And so I need to be thinking about how my race and my class and my gender and my education levels are all intersecting in the way I show up. And by me focusing time and resources on that, I can infuse it in the rest of my class.
Great. There was a clarification question regarding whether the program was a specific program or is it transfers to several undergraduate programs. I'm not sure what that was directed towards, but perhaps we can take some time to have Tulane folks from both programs share a little bit about that. Whether or not I believe it's talking about the course or program or modules, whether it's a specific program or if it's transfers to several undergraduate programs.
I'll say for us, it's really supposed to be interdisciplinary. The reason why we're trying so hard to get our own prefix is because, like, I don't remember if it was who was saying this, but we believe that social impact should be a lens that you take with to, like, we will never try to have a major, never. That will never be our goal. It will be maybe an emphasis or a minor, or a certificate. Those are the sort of ones that we're working with because, you know, it's more of a lens. And so we have students, I mean, I don't even know if we have multiple of any single major in our class. It's supposed to be something that you can learn in frameworks that you can take to anywhere that you can use to help you dig more into any social problem that you're interested in. So it's supposed to be anyone.
Similar to Tulane, it's a lens that we add on.
And Anita, I'm not sure if you can share about McGill's program.
Well, you know, I think so much of what we're talking about now, and I think I from 64,000 feet up, I haven't been to an Ashoka U conference in a number of years. I've had a child in the meantime and a bunch of other things going on. I am so inspired, and I'm just really delighted by how far the conversation around social entrepreneurship and social innovation has evolved from like the early days. I don't know, I'm seeing Lakita kind of shake her heads too. Like, and now we're having conversations about the inner work, like the spiritual nature of social change work too. And I just find that, you know, all of this discourse is so important. And I think I've become more emboldened in my own classroom, the way I show up as a vulnerable person, the way I'm willing to sort of take more risks to speak my truth, and sort of the co-created nature of teaching social entrepreneurship, where people, like the students that I'm coming across as millennials, are just dying to share who they really are outside of the sort of like, the masks that they're all wearing, especially their social media masks. So I'm kind of diverging a little, only because I'm kind of, my head is spinning by how important this work is becoming for people to recognize who they are in the world and how social change is going to take place. And it's no longer about, like, you know, just getting the theory of change right and just measuring the impact, but it's way more complex. And yeah, I'm not answering a question. I'm just providing a reflection.
Yeah, that's understood. And I know same with Agnes Scott, our program is a graduate level program, but it's an interdisciplinary program intentionally to bring all the different disciplines, different lenses, again, from the liberal arts and the sciences, the hard sciences, social sciences to the professions. So all the different lenses are combined together, which is we're able to do at the graduate level, and they actually have a degree program designed for that. We also recognize, and other schools of course recognize, that the undergraduate level particularly, that might be very difficult to do unless they have its own major or is cross-listed in a manner, as Marissa mentioned, at Utah Valley, where anyone can take the courses and not have to actually major in it. And because it is 4:47 based on my laptop, we're technically at the end of our session. So I want to just first of all say thank you very much for attending our session and giving us the privilege of your time to attend and hopefully gain some pearls of wisdom and some grist for the mill. So feel free at this point to log off. I want to thank all the presenters, Rebecca Odden, Cassie Bingham, Marissa Getz, Anita Novak, Jabari Brown, and our host, Dustin New from Ashoka. And if you have any burning questions that you would like to ask before we all take off or the presenters take off, then we can stay around for a few more moments. But we, again, want to respect your time and thank you very much for attending our session this afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
We thank you very much. Excellent session.
Thank you. One last question for anyone who can stay. Amazing point on the value of our educators understanding their role. How do you support their learning on that?
I'd be happy to start, but other people can definitely add to it. So we actually facilitate, so Jabari was mentioning that there's this larger pace training that people can participate in. So we've had trainings with Jabari and local facilitators for our instructors and our team to do that work themselves. Some of us have also gone to the national training. Another group that we work with really closely, the Center for Public Service, has started a white ally learning community. And so some of us are continuing that work with our partners.
I was going to say that a lot of, I find the allyship lens really helpful for me as an educator, and the idea that, that we're in a space of social learning. So I'm not teaching a course, I'm just sort of facilitating a dialogue and a conversation and a place for us to learn from one another. That's really helpful.
So in thinking about this question of privilege, Visions says that each person has privilege and each person also has spaces where they feel oppression, right? So myself and being a man, that's a place where I have privilege. As a Black person, that's one of the places where I feel oppression in my life. And so this journey of understanding myself, it begins right there, right? It's not myself trying to change or myself. It's like really understanding how it is I hold privilege and power in my life and how I can give up some of my privilege so that other folks can experience that as well. So that's what comes to mind.
I would say with our class and understanding our privilege and how like I'm consistently learning, I think Cassie and I try to be pretty, and Cassie will probably add to this, but we try to be pretty like, oh, like it took me a while to learn this or to realize this, or sharing our experiences. When we talk about privilege and intersectionality, you know, going through the activities ourselves with students and being like, yeah, this is my identity. You know, yes, I'm a woman, I'm white, and being able to like have those conversations and make them really normal. I think so a lot of it is going through that. In terms of like roles of privilege where I can be really like, if I'm grading students and they're a little bit late, and maybe they struggle with mental illness, but they don't have like the papers from the university to prove it or something. I have the opportunity to step back and say, no, like I can make a decision here about allowing this in late. Even telling, like sometimes it comes down to telling students like, you know, your life, like, you know, like you pitch me a due date. What do you think is right? Or it's, you know, letting them know like, I understand that our system is really, really hard, but I need you to know that like I care about you, and like please do not please never feel like you have to grovel to ask me, you know, for an extended due date or for help or something like that, because so many students feel like that and they're so scared and intimidated. So I think part of it is like me being vulnerable in that regard, being like, hey, I had, you know, the accessibility papers in college, and there were semesters when I should have, but I didn't. and I'm here to help you. So it's sort of this like shared vulnerability. Also going through the activities with them as a co-learner, you know, a facilitator as a co-learner, I think has really been powerful. And I will say it's something I still need to do better at, but it is something that like we're trying to be really cognizant of.
And if I may say, and I know we didn't talk about Agnes Scott College, but I'll talk just a little bit briefly about my institution. And it's interesting you post that question in the chat room, because Agnes Scott is really almost to an extent the other end of the continuum. We're a very progressive campus. And so students have no problem speaking about what their label, you know, how they identify and the multiple identities that they hold, and the faculty and administrators as well. Almost to the extent where students go to a point of, you know, have no problem with the call out culture, as we call it, you know, saying and labeling what, you know, someone's being oppressed or someone is asserting their privilege in a way that shouldn't be done. And we have to be mindful as faculty and administrators when we're working with our students. It's great that they understand the importance of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, but they also need to understand the nuances and how to express that, and the nuances and how to be able to actualize their values in that regard. And we as faculty have to be mindful of our roles and the language we use and the means in which we communicate that with our students. So they're the main ones who are gung-ho about saying, yes, let's solve the world's problems. And they'll be the first ones to start, you know, an initiative, or they want to take the classes so they can really truly be activists and putting everything to practice. And then we have to say, okay, let's take a step back for a moment, let's not try to, to go too far in the deep end in the other direction. So they have to recognize, those, unfortunately, those organizational and social political nuances that otherwise, once they leave the campus, they may not be able to bridge very cleanly. So it's great, that, we have some campuses where, you have issues of people being recognized and embracing diversity and inclusion and belonging. And then you have campuses on the other end when they almost do it too much. So in either end, we have to make sure that our role as leading these programs and teaching within these programs and engaging with our stakeholders, that we're keeping all of that in mind. So we have a couple more messages. Okay, let's see. I think that looks like that is the last question. I don't see any other questions. So with that in mind, I want to say again, thank you very much.
There's one more question.
Oh, there's one more question. Okay.
From Kelly.
Oh, gotcha.
I feel like Cassie would have a great response to this question for us.
Yeah, I can jump in. Kelly asked a question. She said, how do you actually address intersectionality in this work? So one thing that I would throw in there that I really super skimmed in our presentation, it's really helped us to find the frameworks of the equity design thinking. The equity lens, I'll put a couple of links into the chat right after I respond to this, because there's a couple of different groups who have really got a hold on this, especially the Creative Reaction Lab. They've designed a framework called the equity-centered community design. It really can be applied in any social impact work and also in just like academic and educational work. It's a framework that, like I said, it forces us to look at a few different lenses. It forces us to invite diverse co-creators. That could be diverse ideologically, it could be diverse ethnically, racially, religiously, from any background, depending on what problem you're trying to solve in the work. But then it also asks us to look at historical context. And that's something, Marissa used an example from our class. We always use redlining as an example of that. If you're trying to solve issues for Black communities in the United States, and redlining or the industrial prison complex or the war on drugs or Jim Crow laws is not a part of that conversation, you won't be able to fix those problems. You won't be able to effectively address those problems. And that goes for any social challenge. If we're not reconciling with historic context, and then also with the power constructs that presently exist, right? Which is the other lens that equity design brings to social impact. Power constructs and power dynamics that presently exist. If we're not looking at those, bringing in diverse co-creators and people to bring input, historical context around problems and around populations, and then the existing power dynamics and existing power constructs, we won't be able to do this work. And so that is something that we use in across all of our programming and the curriculum that we've developed. We always emphasize those lenses. So like I said, I'll put a link in the chat that takes you to that framework that's been developed. But that's one of the best tools that I've found to easily create understanding around what is needed to understand intersectionality, because those lenses lead us to looking at the intersecting identities and what those identities bring to the table when we're involved in social impact work. And then one other thing that I'll add to the last question, as educators, when we are trying to be exemplars of acknowledging privilege and identifying intersectionality, is also putting that into action, not only being an educator, and Marissa kind of touched on this when it came to our interactions with our students, but also on our campuses. Are we showing up for the different events and the different programs and different things that are being put on by different communities represented on campus? Marissa and myself, we've made that one of our goals this semester. And when we've shown up to things being put on by the Black Student Union or by the LGBTQ+ coalition or whatever, we've been shocked by how few staff and faculty have been represented at some of these events. And we have been able to make connections with students and build rapport and trust with students when they've seen us there. Not when it's required, but when we've opted to be there. And that has been one of our quickest ways of showing, exemplifying these characteristics as educators.
All right, with that in mind, again, I want to say thank you very much for staying on. I see some of you have stayed on with us. It is 5 o'clock, and we said we would end right at around 5 o'clock, so that give you a few moments to make your way to the next session, the next time slot. And again, I want to thank all our presenters today for joining us, and thank you again, all of you, for your time. And with that, and of course, the recording will be made available through Ashoka U at a later date. Not sure when that date will be. And so this video and this presentation and all the materials that are the links and the like within the chat box should be made available at that time. So with that, we'll say thank you very much. Have a wonderful afternoon and evening, and look forward to seeing you hopefully virtually in some other session between now and tomorrow afternoon. Have a great day. Thank you.